Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my Week 6 LEC overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. It is a very, very interesting week here in Week 6. Of course, 2 days of action, 10 games in total. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste mine, so let's go ahead and let's jump right into it. But before that, let me know down in the comment section below what game you were most looking forward to this week. What team has maybe surprised you the most up until this point? You know, I love having those conversations, so let me know down there below what match you were looking forward to most, because there were a lot of good ones to choose from this week. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our Day 1 games. And kicking off Day 1 and kicking off Week 6, we had a matchup here between SK Gaming and Astralis. And SK is actually able to pick up the win here in relatively easy fashion, especially later in the game. Not the cleanest game from either team in general, but SK I thought did a relatively good job here of knowing their win condition and just playing slow enough that they can't screw it up, right? Like, not mistake-heavy gameplay. And I think that can work against a team like Astralis, as obviously we saw here. It did work against Astralis, so really, really, really good win for SK Gaming. Player of the game here for me is going to go to Genax in the top lane here on the Gwen. He's been, honestly, pretty up and down for this SK Gaming team on their win streak. But, you know, now that this team has really started to show a bit of a sign of life, right, in the end here, I actually think Genax has done a lot better in the last few weeks. He had a very interesting game last week, even though he had a pretty bad one as well. He's really just playing a more aggressive, and I think that that's really going to benefit him against players that maybe aren't as, let's say, lane dominant in Chachi's case. But yeah, Genax had a really good game here. I thought Jezu played pretty well here on the Aphelios, and then Certus was everywhere on the Taliyah. I want to point out with this Hecarim pick, by the way, I am personally in favor of this pick. I want to see more of this pick, more of this, more of Skarner, things along that line. I think that there is a really, really interesting niche in the meta right now where those picks can be really difficult to actively deal with. Even if they're not causing a ton of damage themselves in Hecarim's case, I still think the disruption that Hecarim causes can be really, really difficult for the enemy team to deal with if they don't have exactly the tools to deal with it. And Astralis really doesn't have that in this comp. I think Hecarim is really, really a good pick here, and I would expect to see a lot more of him. Obviously, the Gwen was really, really good, especially towards the latter half of this game with that W. But, you know, overall, I just thought the SK Gaming played this relatively well. Obviously, there were some hiccups, but not the worst game in the world from them. As for Astralis, this was not what you wanted to see. This is a team that I think I've been hyping up. I think a lot of other people have been hyping up relatively throughout the year as like, oh, you know, maybe in a weaker league, this would be a top 6 team, and this is a team that could really compete, but they've really fallen off in the last few weeks. They've definitely taken a little bit of a back seat. They're sitting now at 5-7, not the best place to be here for Astralis. Done of the game here was a little bit difficult because I think a lot of people want to give it to Kabe for his unbelievable play, which we'll get to later, but I'm going to give it to Chachi just because I felt like over the course of 36 minutes, Chachi was the worst player on this team. Kabe just made the worst play on the team. So Chachi's going to get my dud of the series. He was just, or dud of the game here. He was just completely outclassed by Genax in this one. It really wasn't all that close early game or late game. Genax is actually playing a lot more aggressive and a lot more to win rather than just to be safe in lane now. And I think that definitely is not good for a player like Vizichachi, who has, you know, throughout the year so far shown that he is not the best laner, that he's pretty okay in team fights if he can get there, but you know, he can definitely get outplayed in the early game, and he did in this one. I don't think anybody on this team played particularly well, but we have to point out Kabe's, you know, game-losing, quote-unquote, play here. You know, late-game team fight. Gwen is very close to death here. Kabe smelling blood, seeing the blood in the water on Genax, goes into melee range of the Gwen while she has W up. Just keeps attacking her over and over again, doing no damage because it's Jinx in melee range of a Gwen, and just dies, like just straight up dies, and loses them the team fight, which ends up losing them the game. It's a pretty brainless play from Kabe, but the game was not particularly close at that moment anyways. I still have a lot of faith that even if Kabe doesn't make that, like, ludicrous mistake, that SK probably still wins that team fight, but it was really funny to watch Kabe just run in melee range as Jinx and just die. Definitely not something that you want to see out of your AD carry, but alas. And then I'll also note that Dior and Junghoon probably had some of their weaker games. Dior maybe not so much, but Jonghoon, this is probably one of the weaker games that he's had all split long. He's usually really proactive, but I actually thought Treats did a really good job of maintaining pressure not only in the lane, but around the map. He pretty much just outplayed Jonghoon in this game. So, unfortunately for Astralis, this was probably one of their weaker performances of the split so far. But it's not the end of the world outlook-wise. Like I said, pretty much them, SK, Misfits to a degree, I think are all relatively around that like 7 to 9 spot. BDS clearly being the 10. And this is going to be a good win for SK, but I don't know if I really trust either of these teams to really make playoffs off of this. It would take some sort of big late season push, I think, to catch Vitality here in the 6th spot, but technically it is possible, so it's something I'm looking forward to. SK's kind of been on a pretty big miracle run, quote-unquote, so far at the back half of this year. Hopefully they can continue it, because it's really been fun to watch this team kind of get a grip and push forward, being a lot different than they were at the beginning of the split. Moving on to the second game here of day 1 action. We had another fun one here, this time between Rogue and Misfits Gaming. Misfits actually picking up the win, obviously. This is the first week that they have played since they announced that they would be selling their LEC spot after this split. So, what do? They come out and they beat up on Rogue, who was trying to get to Worlds. So, definitely kind of funny in that respect, but pretty insane. Pretty insane, generally speaking. A close game here for most of it, mostly due to Otoamne and Comp trying to keep the game relatively in check for Rogue, but at the end of the day, Rogue had a lead pretty early in this one, as they do for most games. They are able to get a pretty early lead, get gold on the people who need it the most, and then, unfortunately, Rogue time hit, and Rogue time feels more like 2020 Rogue time than it does 2022 Rogue time, which is the worst news that I could possibly give you. Because you just hit a point here where Irrelevant on the Gnar, even VTO a little bit on the Zoe, but especially Neon here on the Zeri, were just ripping through this Rogue roster, this Rogue team, and just kind of obliterated them in team fights, and it really wasn't all that close. So Misfits is going to pick up the win here. Neon is going to get my player of the game here. I've been a lot lower on Neon this split than I think a lot of other people. I think for the most part, this split, Misfits has generally been a little disappointing. I think a few people on this team have had good games, and a few of them have had bad games. Obviously, VTO's great. I'm not going to argue that. I think Mersa's definitely had his ups and downs. I think this game was relatively a down here on the Leona, but, whatever. You still pick up the win. Irrelevant, I think, has mostly been a positive for this team, and I think Neon has been somewhere, below that, in my opinion, but he had a really, really solid game on Zeri here. He was able to hit that power spike where Zeri's just able to completely take over the game, and he very, very much was able to do that. Nobody was going to be able to stop him towards the back half here. Also, I should note, I never even pointed it out, Misfits is going to switch out their jungler here. Schlatan is out, Zanzara is in. So Zanzara is back in here. Obviously, a lot of you should remember him from last split, Astralis, multiple splits on Astralis, but he just played as recently as last split. He comes in here to the Misfits team, picks up a third champion, which we're super excited about. It's not the Skarner, it's not the Trundle. Both of those get banned out against him. He actually picks up the Poppy sometime in his off time, and here we are. He gets to play Poppy. He actually plays it relatively well. It can be a bit of a tricky matchup to play that into so many dashes here, and Gwen, Vi, Talia, all of these things that I think are a little bit difficult to play Poppy into, but obviously very rewarding if you can get it right. I think that Zanzara actually did a really, really good job here. So, big plus here. I think he came in and out-jungled Malrang for sure, but Neon was really the late game carry here, and Irrelevant, I thought, also did a really, really good job for Misfits. As for Rogue, they're in playoff form already, it seems, throwing games that they absolutely have no business losing. They were in a pretty good position here for a lot of the game. Odo had gold, Comp had gold, but they just weren't able to translate that into anything, really. I really don't like Ezreal and Mumu as a bot lane. I don't think it's particularly scaly. I know Ezreal scales, fine, but, Amumu's not someone who can set up Ezreal in a particularly great way. Ezreal wants really long, extended team fights, where Amumu's really good at locking them down for immediate burst, and Ezreal just doesn't have that, he isn't going to be able to kill them as quickly as he needs to, so I'm not a huge fan of that combo, personally, but, it is what it is. And then Malrang, I thought, had a pretty bad game here in the jungle on Vi, just completely out-jungled by Zanzara. Malrang is going to get my dud of the game here. He's kind of been down. I've kind of been down on Malrang in the past few weeks. I think a lot of their problems have definitely come with the fact that he's just getting out-jungled here. And not to say he was the only problem here. I thought Larson had a couple of really troll ultimates here on Taliyah that blocked his team off from actively playing the game. But it happens if you're not super practiced on Taliyah, and Larson's never really been a huge Taliyah player. But at the end of the day, Malrang just was a problem for this team. And he's kind of been a little bit of a negative in their recent slide down the standings. I think they were 8-1. They're sitting at 8-4 now. Certainly not what you want to see from a team that was looking pretty confident and looking pretty consistent moving into playoff spots. But yeah, I mean, end of season Rogue is hit. And unfortunately, it's too constant at this point to expect them to turn it around. This is just what happens when the games get more important as Rogue starts to shut down. So outlook-wise, I've lost a lot of confidence in Rogue at this point. Not to say that Misfits is like a bad team by any stretch, because I think Misfits is a competitive team, but losing to them is not good here if you want to be a top 4 team that wants to go to Worlds. Like, this is just quite simply a game that you cannot lose, that you cannot afford to lose. So definitely frustrating here if you are a Rogue fan, but you gotta hope that eventually this team just figures it out and gets back on track, because right now they're just showing signs of what they've shown every split up until this point, which is that they cannot handle the pressure. And then Misfits, on the other hand, they're going to be very happy for this win. They moved to 500. Technically, they're in a playoff spot. Like, they're not as far removed. Like technically, they're within reach. I shouldn't say they're in it, but they're within reach of a playoff spot. Like, they're not as far removed as you would think at this point, especially with Fnatic really struggling right now. So there really definitely is a world in which they can kind of push for this, final playoff spot here in their final split, but it's just going to be a little bit of a tough ask, because they're going to be looking to probably get that spot over a team like Fnatic or over a team like Vitality. And those teams are just, on paper, better than Misfits. So it'll definitely be interesting to see where we go with that. But they're putting themselves in the position that they need to put themselves in order to make that final playoff spot. So they're doing everything they can. They just have to keep it up. Moving on to our third game here of day 1 action. We had a fun one and another pseudo upset here, as we had Team Vitality taking on Excel, and Vitality's actually able to pick up the win here, as the top teams in the league cannot maintain any sort of consistency. That's just what we get in the LEC, but Vitality picks up a really important win here, and they look really good throughout most of this game. Yes, there was a moment where Excel was really starting to bring it back off of one objective, which, shout out objective bounties, everybody loves them, obviously. But Vitality was able to hold on. They were able to play a lot better. There was a disgusting combo in the back half of the team fight, and the game was over. So let's look at what they did right. What they did right was, like, their players are really coming into form, and I think that that is really, really apparent. You can say what you want about Carzzy and Labrov still being a very disappointing bot lane, because yes, I agree, they're still being relatively disappointing as a bot lane, but what you cannot say, I think at this point, is that this top side is not performing. Alfari has been much improved over the past few weeks. He's actually been a huge positive for this Vitality team over the past few weeks. He's going to get my player of the game here. His Gnar engages were absolutely disgusting in this game. Really just a generally great game from Alfari. And then I've been saying it all year, Perkz has been a sneaky MVP candidate in summer so far. You could argue that he has been the most valuable player to his team and his team's wins. They're sitting at 7-5. And I think they lose a solid 5 of those 7 wins without Perkz. He has been genuinely that important to his team, and so I very much think he should be in that conversation, but I don't think a lot of people are putting him there just because Vitality's not necessarily as high in the standings as, maybe they should be. But yeah, Perkz has been genuinely amazing for Vitality this year, and he continued that. He had a great game here, an unbelievable combo here. I couldn't imagine getting Gnar ulted into a wall and then just seeing a Taliyah on the ground and be like, well, I'm dead. And that's just like, oh well, I guess I die now. But that's what happened this game, and honestly, shout out, Vitality played it really, really well and really fun. I really want to give a shout out to Haru as well. Someone who I've been relatively critical of so far this year is just being either too aggressive or too passive in his games. Like, he never really has that in-between. I think he found a good middle ground here. He was a really, really good influence here, not only in the top lane, but especially on the bot lane here, was able to keep a lot of things relatively intact for Vitality. Just a generally good game here, I think, from the top side of the map. And even if Carzzy and Labrov aren't playing ridiculously out of their minds, because they're still not playing particularly great, it's exciting to see that this top side is actually playing really well. And, hopefully they can continue to play like that moving forward. As for Excel, this team just doesn't have any consistency at all. Obviously, they had the 0-2 week the week before. They come back and go 2-0 last week. And here they are losing to Vitality, and it's just like, man, like, come on, like, where is, like, just win the games you need to win, right? But unfortunately, they're just not that team. Finn is not that player. He's going to get my dud of the game here. He got my player of the week a couple weeks ago, and he's really regressed right back into... Actually, I think it was last week that he was my player of the week. Yeah, he got it last week. He got player of the week last week, and he's regressed right back into being what he was in the bad week for Excel, which is kind of a weaker topside player. You know, he has these weeks where it's like, man, Finn is like secretly a super underrated player. He can be weak side, but he can also get resources and he can do really well. And then he'll have games like this where it's like, oh, he just got completely gapped by Alfari, and it's not fun to watch. Marcoon also has kind of similar problems where he'll have really high highs and relatively low lows. Patrick and Mickey just have no consistency in the bottom lane. There are some games that they look unbeatable, and talent-wise, you would think that they would be unbeatable, but then they'll have games like this where they're going into Carzzy and Lebrav, who are one of the weaker bot lanes, and they just don't look even as good as they do. So definitely frustrating to watch, like, as an Excel fan, like, if you are, but, like, I don't know. It's hard to predict this team. Like, it's really hard to put a pin on what this team does well and what they don't do well, because that changes from week to week so drastically. There will be weeks where I'll call Excel, like, easily the best macro team in the LEC, and then there will be weeks like this where it's like, man, like, they're not even a playoff team in terms of talent. Like, it's very difficult to get a read on them. I think in the end, they'll probably end up hopefully doing better when it comes to playoffs. Hopefully that's one of their good weeks. That's all you can really expect when it comes to the outlook of this team. Because theoretically, like, where they're sitting now at 7-5, they should be in a pretty decent position to, you know, as long as they don't screw it up too bad, at least make playoffs. And then from there, they control their own destiny, and they can really beat Vitality and Misfits and all these teams that might make the back half of the playoffs, like, early on, and go on a run that gets them to Worlds. It's just going to be a little bit tight right now, and you certainly don't like to see them playing the way they are. As for Vitality, this is exactly what you want to see. They're getting hot at the right time. This team has been on fire the past few weeks, and Alfari and Perks have really, really picked up their game. They've become two of the best solo laners in the region, and if they can continue that, they're going to be a threat. They're going to be a threat not only just, you know, to upset some people in playoffs, but actively to make Worlds this year. And I think Vitality obviously went into the year expecting to be able to make Worlds, and a lot went wrong for this team, but they put themselves in a very, very good position to be able to capitalize on that and to be able to push even further for a World spot. So it'll definitely be interesting to see when it comes to Vitality, but this is exactly what you want to see as a setup if this team really does want to push for bigger and better things. Moving on to our fourth game here of day one action. And our fourth game here was a fun one that everybody was looking forward to, just for the memes of it all. We, of course, had Team BDS taking on G2 Esports, the Grabs Revenge game. Can BDS complete the summer season sweep of G2? Unfortunately, they cannot. G2 does grasp victory from the jaws of defeat. And well, I think more accurately, I should say, BDS grasps defeat from the jaws of victory. Certainly a game here. BDS had everything here to win this game. They had an early lead. They had all of the gold on their Aphelios carry. They just needed to peel for him. They just needed to peel a little bit for him. And he was going to do a ton of damage, but unfortunately, Xmatty's positioning isn't perfect. Limit does only engaging on Tom Kench and does 0 protecting of the 7-kill Aphelios. And BDS can't win a single team fight because their late game decision-making in general is some of the worst I have ever seen in League of Legends. Honestly, it's very funny and it's very apropos, but holy crap, I can't believe BDS lost this game. Genuinely incredible. Let's talk about what G2 did right, I guess. Broken Blade was phenomenal here on the Gwen. We've seen the Gwen be a huge problem here in the LEC specifically. A lot of top laners and a lot of players just in general not really knowing how to play into this pick, which is very weird because she's been meta for a year plus now. So you would think at some point you would learn how to play this or learn how to play into it, but top laners seem to be getting really, really lucky with the fact that everybody just tries to attack the Gwen in her W and she doesn't take any damage and she can just wipe enemy teams. So Broken Blade with a really good game. Obviously he played it well, but still I'm not really sure what they're feeding people in the LEC to have them not know how to play against Gwen of all people. But yeah, Gwen had a really good game here, or Broken Blade had a really good game on Gwen, and I thought Targamas was really important here on the Lulu. Obviously, we're seeing some Sivir come out. I believe this is the first one of LEC week. I could be completely wrong here. I've already gone over the 3 games, though. You know, Sivir's a pick that I expect to see a lot more of. Obviously, a lot of people are hyping it up. I don't think it's quite as strong as people are saying it is, especially in Pro. I definitely think it's counterable, but at the same time, I can definitely see the strengths, and I think in a matchup like this, it can be really positive. The Lulu, though, was really the one carrying that bottom lane. Unfortunately, Xmatty was able to get quite a bit ahead by killing Caps a few times here, and Aphelios had the kills. They were able to do a lot with it, and then Targamas was actually able to keep that Gwen alive a lot in those team fights, was able to keep the Wukong from doing, was able to keep the Wukong going, was able to keep Flakked on the Sivir doing a lot of damage. Really just a good game overall for Targamas. Him and Broken Blade, I felt like were the two MVPs of G2 in this game, but Broken Blade is the MVP of the game. Yankos said that was fine. Synchrof I actually thought played a relatively better early game than Yankos did. As he did the last time they played, Synchrof kind of has Yankos' number, but he came around in the end. The Wukong knockups were fine. And G2 I thought relatively played this as well as they could have. Obviously, I'm not going to put it all on them that they won this game, but they did the things they needed to do to actually win the game. So I got to give them some credit on that front. But for BDS, oof, like, you know what I mean? Like, oof. They really should have won this game. Synchrof had gold, Xmatty had a ton of gold, and this really should have been easy. You just peel for the Aphelios and the game is over, but nobody actually wanted to do that. Everybody wanted to make the hero play, and especially Limit, who just kept going in and in and in, and then there was nobody protecting the Aphelios, and he just dies over and over again. It was really frustrating to watch, honestly. Limit's gonna get my dud of the game here. You really, like, on Tahm Kench, like, I don't know how you guys play Tahm Kench, but if you have a 7-kill Aphelios at, like, 15 minutes, then you're just, like, you're there to make sure he does as much damage as possible. That is your only goal at that point. Your engage is relatively relevant, especially because you have a Kennen on this team. You have someone whose only job is to engage, and their only job is to, be a big problem for the enemy team's backline. Your job here is not to go in, and unfortunately, Limit in his first game back here in the LEC just didn't quite get the memo, so he's unfortunately going to get my dud of the game here, but it's not like everybody played particularly well. Xmatty's positioning wasn't great towards the end of it. I'm not going to blame it all on him, but some of it is definitely on him. Nuclear, it was nothing on this Zoe, as the Zoe pick has kind of been for a lot of the split, just kind of nothing. And then Aggressivu was fine on the Kennen. Really wasn't a problem, but, did his job, right? Outlook-wise, I think for these two teams, BDS continues to be the worst team in the league. They have the worst decision-making of any team in the league, especially after 15 minutes. It's really not even that close. I don't really know what they're thinking at all. It's definitely not fun to watch. And then G2, they're going to be happy to get this win. They're putting themselves in that cluster of, like, Vitality, Rogue, like, not Mad Lions, but, like, just teams in that cluster of Excel is another one of, we're going to probably make playoffs, and we're all going to be relatively the same record, and it's just going to be up to our playoff form to determine how well we actually do and which one of us goes to Worlds. So G2 obviously wants to go to Worlds. It's a team that, was first in spring. They definitely have expectations of going to Worlds, and I expect that they probably will. This was a good win here, and obviously they had a good week last week as well, so, they're going to be happy that they picked up the win, but it's not necessarily the most quote-unquote deserved win of all time. They probably don't win this game against any team that isn't BDS. Moving on to our fifth and final game here of day one action here in the LEC. We had a fun one here between the Mad Lions and Fnatic. Fnatic obviously Game 5 Masters. At this point, I feel like they played 75 Game 5s in a row in the day. But Mad Lions with the big win here. Fnatic continues to plummet down the standings. There's really no other way to put it. They are sitting at 5-7, 2 games below 500, about as bad as you can get at this point for a team that is like this. But let's talk about what Mad did well to start this off here, shall we? Niski has certainly been a pickup for this Mad Lions team. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. He has completely unlocked everybody else on this roster. Not only is Unforgiven playing a ton better, right? But, like, Elyoya's looked better this split. I think Armut has looked better in the recent weeks in this split. He was kind of rough in the early game. Obviously, Kaiser's the best support in the West. But just generally, like, it's been really, really fun to watch Niski just completely unlock the map for Mad Lions and be pretty much exactly what they need here in the mid lane. He's going to get my player of the game here on the Taliyah. He continues to be phenomenal. I don't know if I'm being contrary to popular opinion here, but Niski is my favorite for MVP right now. He is on the team that I think has surprised the most people, probably the most consistent team in the LEC, and he's the best player. He's been the most important player on Mad Lions, and I honestly don't even think it's been that close. I think you can say that Unforgiven's been great this year, or Elyoya's been great this year, but even Kaiser, right? But like for me, Niski has just been that guy on Mad Lions. He, for me, is my MVP favorite. He's been playing great. But Unforgiven looks really good here. There's a bunch of ADC bans. Armut looks really good into the Gwen, or on the Gwen, but we'll get into that matchup in a bit. The only person on this Mad Lions team who didn't play a particularly great game here was Elyoya, but I don't even really blame him. He's playing Vi into like Wukong, Ahri, Sivir. Like, there's just not a lot that he can actively do on that champion. I really don't like that pick in general right now. I think Vi is particularly overrated, especially with just the meta champions right now. I don't think she plays particularly well into what a lot of the meta champions are right now, but, you know, it is what it is. You know, Elyoya was fine in this one. He just wasn't necessarily a huge factor for the team, but overall, Mad continues to play really, really well, and they continue to be easily the most consistent team in the LEC. As for Fnatic, it's the opposite. This is, I think, the first ever 5-game loss streak since 2014 for this team, which is, I believe it, right? It's been 8 years since this team has lost 5 games in a row, and here we are. We're sitting at 5-7. This draft is horrible. There's really no other way to put it. I have no words for the Jace pick in the top lane. Jace was a counter to Gwen when Jace was meta, but at this point, like, Jace just does nothing. And he gets, like, Wunder just gets completely destroyed by Armut. It was not even relatively close. The scoreline on Wunder does not show, like, I don't think if you just looked at the box score, you wouldn't understand, like, how worthless this Jace pick was, quite frankly, this game. But Wunder is going to get my dud of the game here. He just was not good. This Jace did absolutely nothing. I don't expect to see this pick anywhere else. When the best Jaces in the world are not picking Jace over in the LPL and the LCK, when Gwen is so popular, you know that that champ is just not in a position to be played right now, and he really is not. He did no damage, so Wunder is going to get my dud of the game here, but it's not like anybody on this team played particularly well. The bot lane continues to be disappointing. It's hard for me to put a lot on Upset. He plays really passive for this team, but a lot of times it feels like he has to, because Hylissang and Razork and Wunder, to an extent, all play so aggressive that if he's going in with them, it's just kind of GG, game over. Like, if he's not at least trying to be the more consistent one, then I really feel like they're lost. But, you know, at the end of the day, Upset is a little bit too passive at points, and we saw that in this one where him and Hylissang just were not on the same page. Hylissang likes to play his frontline Zillion here, and he played it. He didn't play it particularly well, but he certainly played it. Hylissang has actually been, you know, underratedly bad, I think, this split. I think you can make a real case that, like, he's up there with Razork and Humanoid as the worst performing members of this Fnatic team so far this year, but honestly, nobody's played well. Razork, I thought, had a relatively okay game. Obviously, he led the game in deaths, but at the same time, he was really the only one even attempting to make plays for Fnatic throughout this one, so if you're, you know, looking for positives, at least Razork was, like, trying to do things in this game. I don't think anybody else particularly was. Humanoid was really, really not good positioning-wise on the Ahri, even if his score looked good, so outlook-wise, Fnatic is going to be struggling at the rest of the season. They've got a relatively easy schedule the rest of the way through. They've got BDS later this week. They're going to have to start getting back into their winning ways if they want to make playoffs, let alone World. Like, Worlds might even be off the table for this team at this point with the way that they are playing right now. If they want to make playoffs, they really have to, like, hunker down, because right now they're just simply not in the conversation. They're a couple games behind a playoff spot at the very least, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with the rest of the year, but they're going to have to go on a pretty big win streak to even think about sniffing a world spot. As for Mad Lions, they, like I said, the most consistent team in the LEC right now. I think you can make a real case that they're the only team that has really shown any level of, well, we're just not going to lose to the bad teams, and we're going to be consistent, and we're going to be moving forward. Like, they're kind of what Rogue was at the beginning of the year, right? Where they're sitting at a position at 9-3 where it's just like, okay, well, this team is the only team I really trust going into playoffs. But at the same time, what is the ceiling of this Mad Lions team? That's the question that I think we're going to have to learn in playoffs. But up until we get to that point, it really feels like Mad is just going to be the team to beat in the LEC. That is going to bring us into day 2 action here in week 6 of the LEC. And we kicked off day 2 with another SK Gaming matchup, because they always kick it off and Fnatic always ends the day. But another matchup here between SK Gaming and Misfits Gaming. Misfits picking up the really dominant win. Like, this was pretty much over from moment 1. And it was over from draft, if we're being honest, because I cannot believe that SK drafted this comp, and I'll get to it, but actually, I'll get to it now. Screw it. Why not? Let's just go into it. So Zanzara gets the Poppy, and Poppy obviously is ridiculously strong in this meta right now, not only because she offers a lot of utility to your team and she's relatively tanky and she can be super useful, but also because she can stop dashes, and that's a pretty big deal in the meta right now with what champions are currently good. SK then picks Gnar, Vi, Sylas, Alistar, and it's like, oh, now we can't play the game. And that's what happened, is this Poppy just shuts down everything that SK Gaming wants to do. It's completely over, basically for minute 1. There's really no counterplay to it as long as Zanzara actually plays it well. And he played it fine. He's going to get my player of the game here. He was on Poppy and he played it really well. He was able to create a lot of advantages in the late game. He stopped pretty much everything that SK Gaming wanted to do. They have this super hard engage comp against someone who is, like, their main purpose is preventing engages, and they do it better than anybody in the league. So, I don't know. Certainly an interesting draft from SK in general, but Misfits played better anyways. Like, VTO played really, really well here on the Akali. I thought Neon and Mersa were good here on the Sivir and the Leona. Irrelevant was fine in the top lane on the Shyvana, obviously. Just overall, they played well. Not the most dominant, not the most, unbelievable outplay City, game of all time, but they were the better team by a significant margin in this game, and Misfits continues to look pretty good overall, I would say. And then for SK Gaming, like I said, the draft is pretty disastrous, but they actually played this really bad as well. Gilius is going to get my dud of the game here. He made some really, really awful plays here, and I know we were all talking about the SK Miracle run and, Gilius being on another team that's kind of making a break towards the end of the season, but, man, he has been, the weak link of SK Gaming so far this year. He has probably been the weak link of the LEC, in a very similar way to, I don't know, a few, pretty much everybody on Astralis last year, right? Holy crap, he's just not been good. He's been really, 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 really bad. I think this team would be in actually a really good spot if they had a different jungler. And I don't mean to say that in a super flamey kind of way, just Gilius has not been playing well. There's really no other way to put it. Even in their wins, he's never really been the reason they win. And when they lose, he is typically the reason they lose. So something to point out, not a great look for him. But it's not like anybody else in this team played well. Certus had a bad game here on the Sylas, obviously. Treats had an awful game here on the Alistar, obviously. The only person who really didn't play all that bad was Jezu, and he couldn't do anything in the game, but it wasn't particularly his fault, so I want to give him a little bit of a pass for that. But overall, SK just kind of drafted themselves into comp oblivion here, so outlook-wise, SK's about where I think they are, around 8 or 9, right? In that spot. I think 7 up is going to be very difficult for them to get. Them, Astralis, and then BDS, all the way at 10. Them and Astralis, I think, are going to be fighting for 8 and 9 for a lot of this split, at least from what I can see. And then Misfits is going to be a lot closer, I think, to that upper echelon. The top 7 are going to be really, really intriguing. That one of them isn't going to make playoffs, and it very well could be Fnatic. But Misfits is putting themselves in a good position. Like I said earlier, they just need to get the wins against the teams that they need to beat, and they'll probably make it in. So they're sitting at 7 and 6 right now. They pick up the win against SK that they absolutely needed to get. That helps their case quite a bit. They pick up a win earlier this week against Rogue, which a lot of people just were not expecting. That is certainly going to help their case quite a bit. If they can just continue pushing onward here and continuing momentum, even if they drop a couple games, maybe to some good teams here, as long as they pick up the wins where they should, this should be a team that makes playoffs in their final split here in LEC. Moving on to our second game here of day 2 action, and we have another upset. Another upset this week. We've had quite a few, but we keep them rolling here as Rogue takes on Astralis, and Astralis is actually able to pick up the win here. Rogue continues their just free fall. They were in such a good position with everybody really struggling to pick up consistent wins, them being really the only ones to sit at 8 and 1, just a couple of weeks ago, and now they're sitting at 8 and 5 after a really rough 2 weeks here, so pretty much as bad as this gets. Maybe not 8 and 1, maybe it was 8 and 2. You'll correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But yeah, Astralis looking really, really good in this one, and I really have to tell you, Jonghoon is just kind of a different level of player. It's really disgusting to watch him play League of Legends. He is simply too good for this Astralis team. By a big margin. He's going to get my player of the game here. He was so good for Astralis in this game. Those Bard Qs were devastating. Obviously, some really bad misplays here on the side of Rogue. But outside of that, like, he still was really, really good. He was everywhere on the map, as a good Bard should be. And he was just creating plays. Him and Xerxes have actually formed a really nice synergy to patrol a lot of the game. And both of them were really, really phenomenal here. I think you could realistically give this to Xerxes as well. But honestly, at the end of the day, not really. Jonghoon was that good, where it was pretty clear to me, and I think pretty much everybody who watched it, he was the player of the game here. He was really, really phenomenal. But Xerxes was really, really solid here on the Wukong. He's someone who I really haven't talked about a ton this year for Astralis. Like, it's really been Kabe, Jonghoon, and then when they lose, it's usually Chachi or Dior. But Xerxes kind of been there. He's been fine. He really hasn't been a huge positive, but he hasn't really been a huge negative for this Astralis team either. He has games like this where he can be really, really strong, but he's just not consistently, like, carrying the games for this team. Really, that has been Kabe and Jonghoon down in the bottom lane that have really been the power players for Astralis, but generally speaking, I think Xerxes has been fine this year, and he had a really, really good game here against a good jungler in Malrang, who, yes, has completely imploded this week. He had a really bad week just in general, but Xerxes played well in this game. Moving on to what happened to Rogue. I guess, like I said earlier this week, I guess Rogue time just hit a little early, right? Playoff Rogue is just here, and now they're losing, and they're making weird mistakes, and there's just certain weird plays that I can't explain here. Odo Omni's gonna get my dud of the game here. He's, like, out of position and caught out of position, like, 3 different times throughout this game on the Gnar. Just very uncharacteristic mistakes for Odo. Not a good game from him. Pretty much an awful weak side game from him. Malrang also not good at all on the Trundle here. Just gets completely outplayed by Xerxes in terms of map pressure the entire game and really isn't able to recover. And then there was this weird play with Larson where later in the game, Bard throws out a Q and Larson flashes in front of Malrang on the Trundle, and he takes the Q, but the Bard Q bounces and it stuns both of them because it hits both of them now. And so I don't get that play at all. Just some really, really odd misplays from Rogue in this game, and they are really looking tilted mentally. Like, the mental of this team has clearly gone out the window, which is not a good thing to say and not a good thing to hear. The only player on this team that I think relatively played all right was Comp, who I actually thought was pretty okay here and was doing fine for the most part, but as an Aphelios, you really just don't have that kind of power to win your team the game if everybody else is losing and if the other team has a shit ton of gold. So, yeah, unfortunately, Rogue just kind of coasts to this loss after a bunch of really just odd misplays and mental lapses from a team that really didn't have them throughout most of the year. But outlook-wise, I don't even know what to tell you about Rogue. They're in complete freefall mode. They've lost 3 or 4 in a row now, and it's been pretty disastrous for them. I'm very worried about this team. I said last week that I was really worried about this team, and it's only gotten worse for them. So definitely something to keep an eye out for, because Rogue is definitely a little bit scary right now in terms of Worlds bets. This was a team that felt like a lock to go to Worlds just a couple of weeks ago, but they very much have played their way out of that conversation, and they're going to have to work their way back into it, I think. As for Astralis, like, this is a good win. This more so felt like Rogue playing bad than Astralis playing particularly good, outside of Jonghoon, who did have a really good game, and Xerxes to an extent, but really, Astralis continues to just be a good team. I still think they're probably in that same vein of, like, an SK Gaming and maybe even a Misfits, right? They're good, they're just not great, right? I don't know if they're ever going to be a team that would ever contest for, like, a world spot with everything up in the air, but at the same time, I can see them taking a game off of pretty much anybody in the league at this point because of how, volatile I think all of the teams have been. So definitely a good win for Astralis here, even if it's not, something that I think changes their fortune or their outlook all that much in the long run. Moving on to our third game here of day 2 action. We had another fun one here, this time between the Mad Lions and Excel. And Mad Lions pick up another win here as they continue to be the benchmark team here in the LEC. They are 10-3, the first team in the LEC to reach double-digit wins here is Mad Lions, and they continue to roll. They continue to look really, really solid here just in general. This was kind of a fiesta for a lot of the game. Definitely an aggressive game. There was some good, there was some bad, there was some in between here. But a lot of the good came from this bottom lane here for Mad Lions. Unforgiven and Kaiser, who continue to look like arguably the best bottom lane in Europe. going up against one of the other best bottom lanes in Europe here in Patrick and Mickey, and they really obliterated them, Mickey especially. Like, this was not a particularly good game for Mickey X, unfortunately, but let's talk about that later. We'll talk about Unforgiven and Kaiser and how well they did now. Draven Leona can be such a difficult lane to deal with, because Leona has that lockdown, but really, I think it is underrated how much damage Draven genuinely does right now in the meta. I think a lot of people are really starting to understand that Draven is genuinely a power pick right now, but Unforgiven is able to get it in this game and go into a Lucian Nami, which is a really strong early bot lane, and with a little bit of help from Elyoya, is able to completely obliterate that lane. Draven gets infinite gold in this game, and he's just able to snowball that out of control. A really good game from Unforgiven, but also a really good game from Kaiser to set him up over and over and over again on that Leona pick. Just really, really good from this bot lane that continues to grow and continues to honestly feel like they get better week after week after week. Great game from Elyoya and Niski, who were everywhere here. Obviously, Niski's famous Twisted Fate here coming out, and then Elyoya on the Trundle. They were able to impact the game a lot, really able to set up Draven for a lot of these plays, and especially late game were really, really influential. But honestly, Mad Lions just plays like a team, maybe more than any other team in the LEC. They just are a unit, and even if a player like Unforgiven or a player like Elyoya or Armut have a lot of the gold, it always feels like they got it as a team, and they got it as a team effort, and that very much feels like what Mad Lions did here. Just a really genuinely great game overall from them. As for Excel, another 0-2 week here. They're going to be upset by that. They're moving down to 7-6, a lot closer to 500, and closer to the rest of the pack. Like, pretty much everybody's kind of in this big clump, sitting around like 500 here in the LEC. Excel kind of joins them here. A really unfortunate game here for Mickey, and I don't want to dogpile on him too much because there's going to be a lot of conversation around this Nami game, I think a lot this week, but for me, it was not great, but it wasn't entirely his fault. Like, this is just a really unfortunate time to play Lucian Nami, right? This is a lane that really needs to win early, and you're going into Draven Leona, one of the most aggressive and quite frankly, kill-oriented lanes that you can possibly have in the bottom lane, so Patrick and Mickey are already off to a bad start. You're also going into a Twisted Fate. You're going into a jungler that really wants to prioritize getting that Draven ahead. All of a sudden, you are getting targeted over and over again. And once it starts, it just doesn't stop. I can imagine this being a ridiculously tilting game for Mickey, but hopefully these two can bounce back. Patrick was doing... Broxa actually, and I want to point out, I don't really talk about casters too much because I don't typically like listen to the casters too much. But I want to point out, Broxa and Quickshot are phenomenal as a duo, and they were all weekend. All 5 games that they covered, I think, were genuinely, like, fantastic casts. I really, really, really hope to see more of Broxa, and I think him and Quickshot have a really, really nice synergy together. But Broxa, obviously, with the funny caster on Patrick of, like, and the Lucian calling, where did the Lucian calling damage go? Because I certainly didn't see it, or something like that. It was really, really good. Overall, just kind of true, right? Lucian was doing negative damage by the end of this game. Really, the only person doing damage on Excel's side was Nuke Duck, but it really didn't matter. There was no one to assassinate out of the enemy team because if he got hit with 2 Draven autos, he died. So, really, it was just... It was pretty much over by the time we hit the mid-game, even if it was a little bit of a fiesta to get there, but... yeah, Excel just didn't have a great one here. Outlook-wise, Excel's a lot closer to the pack, right? Like, Mad's kind of up in their own tier, and then there's this big clumping of, like, 2 to 7, that it's like all of these teams feel like any of them could really jump out to be one of the best teams in the league. I really have no clue which one I want to, attach my loyalty to. Excel with the 0-2 week here, really not looking good, but, they looked really good last week or whatever, and, like, Misfits continue to get better and better, but, like, on paper, they really shouldn't have the talent to be in there, and Vitality's kind of on a pretty big hot streak, and, we're not even talking about Fnatic and G2. Like, there's just so many teams that are within the reach of being kind of playoff or worlds eligible that it's definitely going to be an interesting final few weeks, and then playoffs are going to be a lot of fun here in the LEC, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact of, like, a team like Excel is just not being as dominant as they should be. But for Mad Lions, like, they continue to be the cream of the crop here in the LEC. I said earlier in the week that they are kind of the team to beat. That continues here. They're the measuring stick. I imagine that they feel pretty confident about going into playoffs as the #1 seed. Obviously, they haven't locked anything yet or anything like that, but if they just continue to play like this, if they continue to beat up on teams that, quite frankly, are good teams, like, it's not like they're just beating the bad ones, if they just kind of continue to coast along and take advantage of what the weaknesses of a lot of the rest of these teams are, I imagine they're going to look and sit pretty when it comes to playoff time. Moving on to our fourth game here of day 2 action. We finally end a streak that I think a lot of fans are really going to be excited to end. And that is the Fnatic loss streak, as we get Team BDS taking on Fnatic, and Fnatic picking up a super important win here. If they couldn't even beat BDS, that was complete disaster city. But yeah, Fnatic is able to pick up the win here. They're going to be happy about it. They play relatively well. They pick some meta champions. They do well. Hooray! Like, I don't know if it's quite as simple as that, but they certainly did their best here. Fnatic had a couple of players on this team that played pretty well in this game. Mostly, I wonder on Gragas. Like, wonder on Gragas in team fights, just, it's a different beast. He is a different kind of player on that champion than he is on pretty much any other champion. I'm not saying that it's become a must ban against Fnatic, but I certainly would ban it against Fnatic. They seem pretty confident to take out the Yuumi themselves, so I don't really feel a lot of pressure to actively ban Yuumi against them. They don't even seem to want to play it, even on blue side. And so Gragas really seems like the pick that I would just sit and be like, nope, anything else, because Wonder on Gragas is simply just a different kind of player, as we saw in this one. He's going to get my player of the game here. He looked really, really solid. He completely dominated Aggressivu. And those team fights, man, those ultimates, those body slams, just everything that he was in team fights here was super important for Fnatic to be able to actively close this game out. So props to Wonder. He had a rough game earlier this week, and he bounced back in a really, really nice way here. But I thought everybody played relatively well for Fnatic, mostly Upset. I actually thought Upset had a really good game here on the Sivir. Sivir can be a little bit of a tricky pick to get ahead on. And yes, he's going into Xmatty and Limit, who have been like the worst bot lane in the LEC. Obviously, they haven't played much, but they were pretty bad in spring. You know, Upset dominated this game. He was really, really solid. He was basically everywhere on the map, and he was collecting farm. He was doing damage. Like, this is how you want to play Sivir. You want to be super proactive. You can really, really hurt an enemy team, and these team fights can become super easy if you have time. So, really good job from Upset. Good job from Hillisang. Good job from Razork, from Humanoid. Everybody honestly played this game relatively well, and I was very, very happy to see that. But for BDS, they just continue to be bad. Really no other way to put it. Aggressive is going to get my dud of the game here. The dude just got nothing done in this game. Like, 0-4-0 doesn't even begin to tell you the story of just how little of an impact that he had and how negative of an impact he generally had on this game. I can't remember a single positive thing he did. Not to say he was, like, a huge, huge issue no matter what, but just, like, I can genuinely not remember a single, like, actively good thing that he did in this game. He got completely gapped by Wonder in the top lane, even if he got, you know, a little bit more farm. Like, Wonder was just involved in more plays and was significantly more impactful when it came to the end game. This Gnar just did absolutely nothing. He was never able to time his megas well. Like, just a bad game overall from Aggressivu, who very much deserves the dud of the game here. Also, bad news for Nuclear Ant, bad news for Limit. Syncroft had a really rough game here on the Poppy. I don't think Syncroft knows he can cancel Poppy ult, and he definitely saved the enemy team a couple times with that, but it is what it is. Obviously, if you're not used to Poppy, sometimes that can be a little bit tricky to actively deal with, but yeah, overall, outside of that, just not a good game from BDS. They continue to look really bad outlook-wise. They're the worst team in the league. They're the first team in the LEC to officially be eliminated from playoff contention and therefore be officially eliminated from Worlds contention. Nobody's really that surprised. I think people are definitely going to be, you know, sad that we're not going to see BDS versus Dignitas at Worlds, but at the end of the day, you know, BDS sitting at 1-12, definitely not a good position to be in there. Clearly the worst team in the LEC. As for Fnatic, they are going to be so thankful that they came across BDS this week, because if they didn't, I don't actually know if I trust them to beat almost anybody else with the mental that they had going into this game. They're going to be very, very happy getting a win here, and hopefully this can help reset a lot of the mental problems that they had and get them back on the right track. They're only one game below 500, which is pretty much a miracle with how they've been playing over the past 2 weeks, so they definitely have a lot to come back from, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility for this team to actually end up in the top 2 or 3 going into playoffs, which would be crazy to think about right now, but really that's how close a lot of the LEC records are, so definitely something to keep in mind. Fnatic is down, but nowhere near out, and I think this game certainly helps them a lot. That's going to bring us to our final game of the week here, our final game of day 2. And it was a fun one here between Team Vitality and G2 Esports. A dominant win for Vitality. And this is pretty much exactly what you wanted to see if you were a Vitality fan. They are kind of like really good at right now. Like, they're on a huge win streak. They're beating good teams. Honestly, I'm so impressed with how Vitality is playing right now. Mostly because, holy crap, these two solo laners are ludicrously good. Alphari on Gnar, again, he's played a lot of Gnar and he's really been successful on it, but I mean, he kills this champ. Like, he is dominant on the Gnar. I don't imagine they're going to be giving him that a lot. And then Perks. Perks has genuinely been an MVP, like top 3 MVP candidate for me this split so far. He has been phenomenal for Vitality, and I assume it will continue for the rest of the split because he just feels like he's playing with a chip on his shoulder right now. He's playing to destroy lane, not just win lane, destroy lane. And then he's not scared to try and make plays in the late game, which I'm really excited to see. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's Perks, right? But at the end of the day, he's not playing too passive. He's playing to win games, and it's very much helping Vitality. Perks is clearly the player of the game in this one, although I want to give a huge shout out to Lebrov, who actually played genuinely phenomenal in this game. I was very close to actively giving player of the game to Lebrov here in the bottom lane, who was fantastic. I mean, this is the perfect Renata game. You're going into Kai'Sa Nautilus, and then even Viego Aurelia. Like, it is very difficult for them to actively deal with the Renata ultimate, or just the Renata in general. And Lebrov did such a good job of being pretty much everywhere on the map that he needed to be. This is easily Lebrov's best game of the split. He was really, really genuinely great in this one, and pretty much just outclassed Targamas by a considerable wide margin. Very, very, very fun to see from him, but Haru continues to just be good. Like, he played Trundle in this game, and he was where he needed to be. I'm not going to sit here and say that he was, like, dominant or anything, but he played a really good game. And then Carzzy actually made some really smart rotations, was really, really safe, made sure not to give away free gold. Pretty much everything you need from him if Alphari, Perks, and Lebrov are going to play like this. Let them be the carries, and Carzzy, all you have to do is not be a problem for this team. He was not a problem in either of their games this week, and they really dominantly won both of them. So I very much expect this Vitality team to continue being on the up and up. I certainly think there are still problems. Carzzy is definitely someone who tends to get himself into trouble, and if he does that, I think he can definitely be a negative towards the team. And Haru, I still am not sold on being like an exceptionally great jungler in the league right now, but with how Alphari and Perks are playing, like, I really, really think Vitality could be a genuine, like, title threat this year. Not just a Worlds threat, but someone like a team that I think that has the talent to genuinely win the LEC here in summer. It's definitely on the table still, and with how they're playing right now, I certainly wouldn't look past it. As for G2, this is not the game you wanted. They barely beat BDS earlier in the week, mostly because BDS just completely throws the game, and then they just get completely outclassed here by Vitality. Caps is going to be my dud of the game here. He just got completely destroyed by Perks, in lane and out of lane. Like, this was not a good game from Caps overall. Perks just had his number from moment one. It was very, very fun to watch from a Perks side of things, but definitely not from a Cap side of things. He's kind of been up and down so far this split. G2, sitting at 7-6, they are likely going to finish with the worst record that they've ever had in the LEC this split. And I think a lot of that has just been the up and down of Caps. Like, he's been good, but he has not been consistently great. There are some games where he's just not good, and that's just not the typical Caps that you're seeing. I still have faith that he'll be able to turn that around when the games get more important, because at the end of the day, he's the most talented player the LEC has ever seen. But it's certainly worth noting that he hasn't been this beacon of consistency that everybody else around him has been, like, struggling, and it's Caps carrying the team. Like, that's not the narrative right now. Right now, the narrative is that Caps really has not been playing up to his talent level, and he really needs to get back to that. I thought Broken Blade and Yankos were also, like, really bad in this game. So was Targamas. Pretty much everybody. I shouldn't even say, because it's not like Flakkid was bad, but he just wasn't good, right? Nobody on this team played well in this one. Everybody was outclassed. There was a level 2 play that just went completely out of control. Made the game pretty much unwinnable for G2, at least in their eyes, and they just kind of faded into obscurity. This team has some major, major early game issues. Even in their wins, this team has really struggled to get an early game lead, and that is something I'm very concerned about. I don't really know what that means for the big outlook, like for the long-term outlook of this team, but if this is a team that is like genuinely going to struggle to beat other teams in the early game, they're going to be easy to draft against, and they're going to be easy to game plan against, especially in a best of 5. So I'm definitely starting to get worried about G2. They had a good week last week. They're not in, like, disaster position, but outlook-wise, like, I'm not super sold that this team is, like, guaranteed to go to Worlds. Just like I'm not super sold that pretty much anybody in the LEC right now is guaranteed to go to Worlds, except for maybe Mad Lions, right? Like, they feel like the only team that is kind of sitting here and sitting good, but for G2, the consistency issues are a problem and the early game issues are a problem. If they can turn those things around, I have enough faith that there's talent on this team. Like, if they go into late games even or ahead, I have enough faith that this team is going to be fine in late game team fighting and decision making. They have experience doing that, but the problem has just been that they never get to go into it even or behind, or even or ahead. So it's definitely something worth noting. Now, as for Vitality, like I said, they're on a huge win streak right now, and they're looking really good. Perks is looking like an MVP. Alfari's kind of back in form. Labrov had his best game of the split here. If they can continue this should be a team that does make Worlds, and this should be a team that genuinely contends for an LEC title, which, if you asked me 4 weeks ago, I never in a million years would have told you that that was going to be the reality for Vitality, but that's where we're at this point. They genuinely have figured it out, and I really like the outlook of this team moving forward. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 6 LEC overview and analysis of all 10 games across both days here. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated LEC standings from 1 to 10. Any ties in standings will just be broken alphabetically. In the first column, you're going to see my power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. I should note, any team highlighted in any color means they've either locked or locked a playoff spot or been locked out of the playoffs, unfortunately, right now. That is just Team BDS at the bottom, officially being eliminated from playoff contention here. Everybody else is technically still in the running. Even Mad Lions could theoretically miss playoffs at this point. So, but let's talk about the biggest risers and fallers. Really, there's one big riser this week, and that's Vitality. Vitality jumping up from number 6 in my power rankings up to number 2. I've talked about it this week. They really feel like the second most consistent team right now, mostly because of how much I really do trust that Perks is like an MVP caliber player. And Alfari's really started to play well. Labrov, I think, has his upside. So does Haru. And Karzi hasn't been dying. Like, if they continue to do this over the course of, which they've done, by the way, for a couple of weeks in a row now. If they continue to do this over the course of the rest of the split, this very much should be a team that contends for the title and wants to go to Worlds. Outside of that, everybody else is just dropping down 1. I really can't separate Excel, G2, Rogue. Like, it's really hard for me to actively pick a difference. So, no big changes there right now. Excel drops down 1, G2 drops down 1, Rogue drops down 1. They are all have their struggles right now, and all of them are kind of up in the air for which one of them are going to make playoffs, but, 3 through 5 is very, very difficult to separate, and so this is just the way that I rank them in terms of confidence level at the moment. Fnatic still is at 6. I still have them over Misfits, although it is very close right now. I think if Misfits continues to play the way that they are, and if Fnatic can't really recover after this BDS win, that's when I'll start to pull the trigger on moving Fnatic out of that top 6 spot. But right now, I just have trouble actively moving them out of there with how much talent they have, and the fact that they're only 1 game out of a playoff spot. It's not like their season is completely over or anything like that. And I imagine that over the course of 2 weeks, over the course of 4 games, they should theoretically have a better 4-game stretch than Misfits. But obviously, we'll have to wait and see on that. And then SK does jump Astralis here, going from 8 to 9. They beat him this week, and I do feel a little bit more confident about SK's late season resurgence rather than Astralis as a whole team. Yes, Jonghoon is phenomenal as a player, but outside of that, I don't really trust anybody else on Astralis at that same level. So those are the risers and the fallers. Let's talk about the player of the week and the dud of the week here in Week 6. And my Week 6 player of the week, no surprise, I think, to a lot of people, is going to go to Perks on Team Vitality. He continues to be a genuine MVP candidate for this team, and he continues to push them up the standings. He had a phenomenal week this week, and I expect that to continue. He's been continuing it all year long. He's been the best laner in the LEC, pretty much no question, and even if he does make some mistakes in the late game, sometimes it's usually because he's at least trying to make some proactive plays, and so I'd rather you do that than just sit there and wait and do nothing. So yeah, Perks overall I thought has had a great season, and he had a very good Week 6 here. He's going to get my player of the week. My dud of the week in Week 6 is unfortunately going to go to Malrang on Rogue here. Not a good week for the Rogue jungler. This is a team that really started off hot and has just plummeted down the standings here. I mean, I guess not plummeted down. They're at number 2 here, but they were a consensus and a clear cut above everybody at number 1 for a lot of this split, and they've just had a pretty disastrous last 2 weeks. I'm very, very worried about how this team is playing right now, and Malrang is a big problem with that. He did not have a good week at all here in the jungle, getting out-jungled in both games that they played against 2, quite frankly, weaker opposition. So definitely worth keeping in mind, but my dud of the week for Week 6 is going to go to Malrang, and my player of the week in Week 6 is going to go to Perks. But yeah, that's going to do it. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot for the channel. Let me know down in the comment section below who your player of the week, your dud of the week, your game of the week, all of that was. You know, I love chatting it up with you guys. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.